You're listening to the Turn Autism Around podcast, episode number 196. Today we have Michelle C. back on the podcast, and we are talking specifically as a follow-up to last week's podcast, all about desensitization. Michelle and I are talking about real-life examples where her daughter was completely freaking out with bath time all of a sudden. We talk about how the first dental visit, the first doctor visits were very problematic, and how Michelle uses the procedures she learned in the course to completely pair up or repair any situation for both of her daughters, one of whom was diagnosed with autism at the age of 2, and one who is now 2.5, and typically developing. So she uses these procedures all the time, and she calls herself the desensitization queen at some point in this interview, and I think she's got that title nailed. So let's get to this really great episode with Michelle C. Thanks so much for joining us, Michelle. It's great to have you back on the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here today, Mary.
Yeah. So this is your third time on the show. You've previously been on episode 78 and 164, and we can link those in the show notes for today. So our listeners that listen all the time are maybe know your story and that sort of thing, but I'm sure there's a lot of newer listeners out there. So can you very briefly just catch up anybody new here? How did you fall into the autism world, and why are you on the show 3 times?
Yeah, of course. So I am in the autism world because I have a daughter whose name is Elena. She is in Mary's book in chapters 8 and 13, I believe. And in 2020, she was diagnosed with autism just before her 2nd birthday. She struggled very much with language. She had severe self-injurious behavior. I really wasn't sure what to do. Honestly, I worked really hard to set up services for her, but COVID hit, and one by one, each of those services were shut down, and I was devastated. My whole family was devastated. It just felt like such a dark time in our life. And I was scrolling through Facebook at midnight, and I found an ad for Mary's courses, and thank goodness, because I started the Turn Autism Around approach, and my daughter seriously went from 2 words, mom and doggy, that were like not very functional. She didn't even really know what those words were. She just kind of echoed them. And she went from those 2 little words to over 500 words by the end of the course.
And you finished the course in like record time. Like the access is 60 days. That's what we plan for. It's about 10 hours in length, but you finished the course in 33 days. And I remember it was during COVID, and all of a sudden I hadn't even heard, from you in the group and everything. And then all of a sudden in the Facebook group and our community, you said, my daughter went from, basically 0 words to 500 words in 33 days. And oh my God. And I was like, oh my God. Like, I mean, I believe in my approach and I know the techniques work, but that was just sounded too good to be true. So I actually asked you for a Zoom call, and that was podcast 78. I just said, can I record this just in case it turns into a decent podcast? And one of my absolute favorite podcasts of all time is 78. So, so now you actually work for me, very part-time, but you are a high school teacher by training, and now you work for me, and you help other members. So today we are going to talk about desensitization. And you mentioned that Elena made it into chapters 8, and I think she's a little bit in 9, but mostly in 8 and 13. And chapter 13 of Turn Autism Around is called Desensitize Doctor, Dentist, and Haircut Visits. And the reason that Elena made it into a big chunk of this chapter is because once you posted, I don't know if I had already interviewed you for podcast 78, but right around that time, her language really exploded. Not only did she go from 0 words to 500 words, but the words she got after the course were like 2-word phrases, contractions, pronouns, prepositions, things that you don't even teach. We don't even learn how to teach in the toddler course. We cover those sorts of things in the verbal behavior bundle, but you just got all this natural explosion of language. But what happened was then you posted in the group, I remember, that you posted that all of a sudden she was screaming for bath time. So what was that about? Like what were you seeing back then?
Yeah, this was a child who loved bath time previously. I had just posted all of this success in your group, and I really wanted to make that Facebook post to thank you and your team for the Turn Autism Around approach, because her language had just exploded, and our lives overall, just the whole family, everyone benefited from this. And we were having such a great time. And then all of a sudden, my kid is just exhibiting behaviors that she did before she was vocal, and which is like screaming and, not understanding why we have to take a bath and, refusing to go in the tub. And I didn't know what that was about. She wouldn't even set foot in the tub. And so I had to sponge bathe her for days. And then finally, I was like, well, maybe it's just a phase and she'll just get through this in a couple days. And I'll just sponge bathe her until then. I was like, how long can I go without washing her hair? Because she just wouldn't tolerate it at all. She used to love the feeling of the water going back and looking up at the ceiling. And because she, had enough language to look at the ceiling so that I could, drain the water behind her head. But yeah, I was like, my gosh. So I posted in the Facebook group and I said, I don't know what to do. I can't get her in the tub. It's getting to the point where I have to put her hair up every day because it's just so dirty and oily. And, she previously loved bath time. That was our nightly routine. It was something that she loved. It was a calming activity and I just couldn't get her to go in.
Yeah. And I remember, and actually you, during that time, like after the toddler course, we do recommend, and we actually made this transition easier and smoother and everything, but we do recommend that people move on to the verbal behavior bundle. And so you had moved on, and this was one of your first Facebook comment or Facebook posts in our verbal behavior bundle group. And I remember thinking, oh gosh, we helped her so much with language. And our course is just not about language. It's also about self-care and daily activities like eating, sleeping, bath time. And then it's also about reducing problem behavior. So I dove in, and based on my experience, I mean, this is very common. And because I'm both a registered nurse and a behavior analyst, I do tend to want to tackle these activities of daily living that are intertwined with problem behaviors. Like I know as a mom of 2 kids, one with autism, one without, that can really derail everything. If you've got a child who won't take a bath or won't take medicine that they need, or you don't know how to get the eye drops in that they need and that sort of thing. And I do have experience with bath time being difficult. One of my clients, Cody, his mom was on the podcast probably a year or 2 ago. We can link that in the show notes, but I remember having desensitized the bathtub and make it better. So I remember I asked you, did Elena have a medical procedure or something happen in the bathtub? But a medical procedure, which you would think, did she have to be held down for stitches or for a blood draw or something? You'd be surprised how many times that it's something not in the bathroom that derails something like bath time. And there was a procedure or an MRI or something, right?
There was. And I was so obsessed over, conditions in the bathroom. I was like, oh my gosh, was the water too hot? Did I ever put her in scalding water on accident? I always did the elbow check. If it's an acceptable temperature for my elbow. It's an acceptable temperature for my kid, right? So it wasn't the water. I was just obsessing over what's in the bathroom. I'm like, what is it in here that she doesn't like? Did I buy any new toys that are scaring her? What is it? But then you mentioned medical procedures, and she had two medical procedures very recently. And one of them was an audiology test. So for speech therapy, they periodically require, at least in my area, they require you to get a hearing test. So she had to get one of those, and it was just like terrifying to her. She didn't like being in a room separate from me. And they kind of they told me what they were going to do, and I didn't like it, but this procedure had to get done. So they held her head, and they, put the otoscope in her ear. I believe that's what it's called. And so they put it in her ear, and she just screamed. And because it was a stranger touching her, she didn't understand really why she had to do it. And I mean, she had language at this point, but her anxiety levels were just through the roof. So there was that. And then she also had to receive anesthesia for an MRI, because when she was diagnosed with autism, we put ourselves on a wait list for a couple of different medical procedures just to see what was going on with her, make sure we were ruling out other medical conditions at the time. So the MRI and the audiology test were done just before she started being terrified of the tub. And I remember you said that, and I thought, what would that have anything to do with it? And it actually had everything to do with it.
Yeah. So, if you think like they're touching her head, it's pretty similar to head washing. And it's amazing how a medical procedure could ruin haircuts. It can ruin picture taking, like just keeping the child still and positioning them. I mean, it's amazing how it can really have an effect on everything. So that was it. And Rachel was on the show fairly recently, a couple of months ago. We can link that in the show notes. And she has a typical son, Everett. And so all of these procedures work for typically developing kids on the spectrum. These are just general procedures that work no matter what. But toothbrushing got unpaired because somebody else put Everett to bed. Like her sister came over and put him to bed, didn't know the routine, or maybe pushed toothbrushing too much, or anyway, toothbrushing got unpaired. So the other thing about the bath is I would look at, did you go out, for the weekend and somebody else do the bath time routine? Did your husband try to give you a break by doing the bath and then did it out of order, or, did something that she didn't like? And that was a common issue for Cody, is that, they wanted to alternate who was giving the bath. But if you're having a problem, like a freak out, it's really best for one person to take charge, at least until it gets repaired. And then for both parents to kind of get together and say, okay, this is the way bath time goes in this order. And this, we count when we wash hair, like just all those little things that you may be doing. But in this case, it did seem to be triggered by the medical thing. But in actuality, okay, we figured that out, which doesn't have a big effect. It's like, now what do we do? And so I remember we gave you some advice, like we're not able to, even if you join the course and join the group, we're not able to go like exactly do this, but we're able to say, generally you have to repair the bathtub, which you have to go all the way back. And on page 210 of my book, we actually list the steps that Michelle actually did from our basic information. Like I said, or somebody said, you might have to start with the child out of the bathtub, fully clothed, playing with toys inside the bathroom with water. And so you formulated your own plan based on Elena's situation and what she was going to tolerate. So why don't you just tell us quickly what you basically did?
Yeah. So it was very similar to what you just said. It was a process. It took probably a couple weeks, I would say, for her to be fully in the tub again, happily. But it was definitely worth the patience, and it was worth the effort. And really, it's not. I don't want anyone to think that this is like an overwhelming process. It's very simple steps. You just have to think about what your child is willing to tolerate and end on a good note every single time, without crying. And that's the goal. So for Elena, I would just keep her in her clothes and I let her step in the tub and play with her toys in the tub. No water. Nothing. She just played with her toys and she sat in the tub and she rolled her little cars around and we would do that in there. And she loved that because she's very much a quality time love language kid. That's why table time works so well for us. I feel like that's why her language exploded when it did. On top of her natural abilities, of course, the Turn Autism Around approach is just so wonderful for quality time. But anyway, so she would just play in the tub with her toys. And then the next day I, because she liked that. So the next day I put a little bit of water, like an inch or two of water in there. And I let her stand outside of the tub and play with water toys in the tub. And this was a long time ago, so I might have missed something that I actually have in the book, but this is like the general gist of it. So she did that. And then the next day, I had her wear just a diaper, and she got in the tub with just a couple inches, like a little bit of water. And she got in and she played with her toys while standing in the tub in the water. And then, the next day, this is when I started getting problem behaviors. It wasn't an absolutely perfect process, as was stated in the book. I didn't do this perfectly, and you don't have to do anything perfectly to get progress.
It's like a dance, and
yeah,
nobody, whether you have a BCBA standing right there, it's still a dance. Whether you have, a list of desensitization, you're going to have to push it enough to keep any problem behaviors at bay. If you get a little whining, you pushed a little too far, but you don't want to take it back down right that second. So it is a real big dance. And we do have the actual steps, and the steps are going to be different for Elena versus Johnny versus whatever. Some kids we put in bathing suits and then they can play in the water. You're eventually going to have to get back to hair washing and again, doing that as quickly as possible, but keeping the problem behaviors at bay. You might, get new tubby toys or crayons for the bathtub, or, a spigot with an elephant on it, a new hose. If you're used to, pouring with a cup, you might want to have an elephant hose that attaches to your thing. They might have, for Cody, for instance, he really minded the water in his eyes and he wore glasses. And so we're thinking like sensory wise, what he was feeling, or like he couldn't see without his glasses. And then he's in the bathtub and then he's having all the sensory input on top of it. So for him, having a dry washcloth that he or the adult held over his eyes while they washed their hair. So, there's so many different techniques, but I will say that it ended with her within a week or two actually requesting more bath and stay in the bathtub and got back on track. Plus, you learned the steps. I mean, basically desensitization, it sounds like a big word and confusing. It's pairing or repairing anything. So whether it's the bathtub, whether it's Mr. Potato Head that suddenly the child doesn't like, anything, a person, a room, a toy, anything can be paired or repaired with this desensitization process. So in chapter 13 of Turn Autism Around, we have the steps Michelle used for the bathtub. We have the steps used for a haircut for Max, which is story I tell at the beginning of the chapter, how he, screamed during haircuts and how we have to break everything down. So, and you learned how to desensitize everything, not only for Elena, but for her typically developing sister. I mean, one thing we didn't say, or maybe we said it in the other podcast, is Elena has a sister that's.
Yeah, she's 2.5. She'll be 3 on December 16th.
Okay. And Elena is 4.5.
Yep, she's 4.5. She'll be 5 in February.
Okay, so they're 2 years apart. And you were at home, you're a high school teacher, and you were at home maternity leave with the baby and with Elena, who was just diagnosed. And your husband is a police officer, so he was out, working, and you were basically home with zero intervention, zero Zoom calls, zero people coming in. You didn't take your girls out at all. I mean, you were basically in a very silo situation, and the only intervention was you taking my course, which you also have some pretty, in addition to your pre and post language sample, which is part of my course, which you had documented her 2 words in 1 hour and then her 180 words and phrases. So we actually know what those words and phrases were. You also had standardized speech assessments before and after the course. And I, in addition to my BCBA mentor, Dr. Rick Cabina, wrote up a white paper about Elena's amazing transformation during that period. And that is at marybarbera.com/white paper. We will link that in the show notes as well. But you had your hands full, and you now, like right after we taught you how to repair the bathtub, you had the information to get anything repaired for both of your girls. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. And thank goodness for that, because even Elena's BCBA, because eventually when COVID restrictions were lifted just a little bit toward the end of the summer of 2020, Elena was able to go to ABA therapy in clinic. And I was just so empowered by that point, by the way. I had already taken I took all of the toddler course, and I had already taken most of the verbal behavior bundle by that point. So I was just so empowered, and I would look at my BCBA's goals and I would say, this is appropriate. This is not. What is this gap in level 2 in the VB map? I want to talk about that because you skipped that in our meeting. So I just felt so empowered. But where was I going with that before I had a tangent? So her BCBA even said, I've never done more desensitization programs with any kid than with Elena. So, and I would tell them exactly how I wanted them to be done, because she was such a sensitive kid. Now she's a lot more easygoing. It's much easier to talk to her about things and prepare her, like just verbally, just talk to her about things. But there had to be a lot of practice for things like the dentist and those kinds of things.
Let's talk about the doctor first. So what were doctor visits like when she was 18 months, 2 years, right when she was diagnosed?
So doctor's visits, that's actually one of the reasons why I was in so much denial for a little bit, because at her 18-month appointment, she was toe walking, and there was no language, nothing to speak of. And she stopped waving. She had stopped doing things that she used to do for attention. So I thought that was so strange, but she was on her phone the whole time during her 18-month appointment.
On your phone, not her phone.
No, I'm sorry, my phone. Yeah, not her.
I hope she does have her own phone, but no, that's very common. So you gave her your phone to keep her busy while you chatted with the doctor about her delays. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. And so the doctor didn't seem concerned about anything except speech, because she should have had approximately 6 words at that point. But if the main point that I was trying to make there was, if I took my phone away, my phone, not hers. If I took my phone away, It felt like hers because she had it so much back then. But if I took that phone away, she would be all over the office, running all over the place. And that's exactly what happened at her 23-month appointment. It was supposed to be like a 2-year well visit, like a 24-month well visit, but we took her a month early because we were like just so concerned about what was going on with her. And so we took her in and she was all over the doctor's office, screeching, stimming very heavily, had zero functional language. She was just like doing anything she knew how to do to comfort herself without a screen. She was very addicted to the screen, but we wanted the doctor to see these behaviors and tell us what they thought it was. And immediately she goes, I think it's autism. And I was just floored. My husband expected it. My husband thought that for a while, but I was just like, now you're making me think my child has autism, as if she didn't just say it. And I'm just in my mind, I'm like, no, she didn't just say that. I was so shocked. It just floored me. But yeah, her doctor's visits went very poorly before I learned about desensitization through the Turn Autism Around program. And we just left the pediatrician 2 days ago. That's why my voice is a little bit off today. We've all had a bit of bronchitis. And so we brought our daughters in, both of them, for the same appointment. And my little Isla, the poor thing, she didn't want to take her shoes off because she loves them. And she's just like yelling and screaming and like not handling it well. But my 4.5-year-old Elena, the girl who used to screech and cry and scratch herself until she was bleeding, throw herself on the ground, rip her shoes and clothes off. This girl couldn't wait to go to the doctor, tell her about how she was feeling, tell her how her throat hurt. And she was very happy to get her blood pressure checked, to have the stethoscope on her back and on her heart, and to have her ears looked at and her eyes and her, and it took some time, of course, to get her used to the doctor, because it's not somewhere we go every day. But there are ways to desensitize. There are ways to talk about it. And as your child's language improves, hopefully, with the Turn Autism Around program, the understanding makes such a huge difference, that receptive understanding of this is what's going to happen. And
did you use tools like playing doctor? Did you use visual little books? Did you use video modeling? Like, what kind of techniques did you use to pair up the doctors?
I did. I have, the kids have tons of doctors' kits, and we would play doctor together. And I would have Elena's cousins, who are a little bit older than she is. They're typically developing. I would have them play doctor with her. And Elena loves a show called Daniel Tiger. And there's several episodes in Daniel Tiger about going to the doctor and what's going to happen. And it helps to talk about it first. And so it took a little bit of time. And the doctor's office, the dentist, the dentist was a little bit smoother because I was able to bring her to this pediatric dentist that specializes in special needs children and special needs patients in general. So she was able to go in without an appointment and just kind of look around and sit in the chairs and look at the fun waiting room and see her name on the whiteboard. They have the names of all the patients for the day. And so it made her feel so much better about going to the dentist. The doctor's office didn't offer that, but like we talked about at home, we played doctor, we talked about it. And fortunately, Elena's language was such where we could talk about it, and she would get more comfortable with it the more we talked about it. And the more I bought books, I bought seasons of Daniel Tiger and other kids shows that helped her with it. So,
right. And what do you do to go to the dentist for the first time?
So the first time I took her to the dentist was a complete disaster, I will say. I did not know a lot about desensitization then. I was in your community, but I just thought I thought since her language developed so much, I thought we could wing it and it would be okay. It wasn't. She was 2.5.
Okay, 2.5. And you went to the dentist and it didn't go well.
No, it didn't. She screamed the whole time. It was exhausting. We were both sweating. Her hair was wet because she was crying and sweating, and we had to like hold her. The only reason they cleaned anything is because she was screaming. And I'm laughing now. It wasn't funny then, but I mean, now it's just like, oh my gosh, like what was I thinking? So it just did not go well. So it took some time to repair the dentist.
You switched to a pediatric special needs dentist at that point. Did you try a regular dentist?
So I tried my regular dentist down the street, the one that I go to. And he's just a very nice man, but he's very, like prim and proper. And I don't think he gets a lot of child patients, or at least not special needs child patients. So it was just something that he just kind of wasn't prepared for.
Yeah. And even if you have a special needs dentist, Lucas, we've had problems with haircuts early on, and we made a visual book, and we have reinforcement at the end, and we had my typically developing son Spencer go and model and do videos, and we had to work with that. The dentist, we do go to a special needs dentist, and that's really good now because now he's an adult. So because she does pediatric and special needs, he could go there as long, through adulthood, which is really great. I mean, Elena is such that, she has full language and she's, in school without support. So she's probably not going to need a special needs dentist her whole life. She can transition to a regular dentist at some point, but it is good idea to have a pediatric dentist, at least for your kids, especially if they're on the spectrum or having any kind of problem behaviors. But the techniques you learned about bath time and playing doctor, you can also play dentist. I do have a video blog where I modeled with Lucas laying in a recliner chair and got a little dental kit from the dollar store where I could practice a little bit. But in the end, especially with a dentist, it's not, it's every 6 months or every year. And Lucas isn't, Lucas is a full grown man at this point. And even when he was a teenager and a child, over 100 pounds, and he can tolerate opening his mouth, letting her count them. But in terms of like holding things in his mouth for x-rays, or in terms of getting a cavity filled, like that would never fly. I guess if somebody, put a gun to my head and said, you have a week or a month to make this happen, I could probably, with my behavior analytic skills, make it happen. But it's like, for everybody's safety and just it's just not worth it to me. Like it's not worth it to him. Like I don't think it's worth it. I am a very much a no cry, don't hold kids down for anything unless it's an absolute emergency where their head is gushing, and but get them out, get them under. You don't have time to repair everything when this goes south. So if you are listening and you have children or clients who are screaming during the day for anything, screaming because they don't want to be at the table, screaming about bath time, screaming about going to the doctor, screaming about not having TV time, whatever they're screaming about. I consider that a major problem behavior with screaming and self-injurious behavior like Elena was experiencing. Like we cannot do that for our kids or our clients. That things get unpaired. That quickly, the bath time became unpaired, required, weeks of struggle, weeks of fixing. Right now, if they wanted to hold either of your girls down for a not emergency procedure, what would you say?
I would say, no, thank you, just please. And that's what I did. When I actually, because Elena stims in a way, or she doesn't anymore, but she used to stim in a way that scared me a little bit. Her face would tense up. and her body would kind of like shake a little bit. And I just kind of wondered if seizure activity was an issue. So we did have her when she was, I want to say like closer to 3, but still 2. We had her get an EEG done, which is a little bit intimidating. But I had enough knowledge with the Turn Autism Around program to to pair it up and make it really fun. I said that her and I were going to have a pajama party at the hospital for 2 days because it was a 48-hour video monitoring EEG. I said,
was she at that point?
She was almost 3. She was closer to 3, but still 2.
Okay.
So she was still very young. And I told her, I talked to the hospital on the phone. They're like, don't worry, we'll wrap her up in a sheet and we'll just like hold her down. And then we'll get all of the, I forgot what they were called.
Yeah,
The little
EEG
yeah.
lead.
Yeah. Elena called them stickers. She thought it was so cool that she was getting stickers on her head and that she got to wear a cool backpack with all her cords. And she was kind of like, but we had our own room and it was a very pleasant experience because I did not let them wrap her in a sheet or restrain her in any way. I said, it'll be okay. Let's talk to her about it. Just tell me how I can, what's going to happen so I can talk to her about it. And we'll talk about how this goes. And she was so excited to spend 2 days with me at a pajama party at the hospital because I made it sound like it was going to be this like fun camping type, like glamping experience. And it was just it ended up being such a great experience because she was excited to be there. And fortunately, there was no seizure activity recorded. I'm just the type of person that wants to rule out any other medical issues. So desensitizing to these pretty big medical procedures became very urgent for me because if I was going to go through all of these medical things, I had to make sure she was okay with it and that we didn't have to hold her down. Unfortunately, for the first couple medical procedures, I didn't have the knowledge from your course. So I kind of just like forced the issue and let the audiologist like hold her head in place. And it was just so awful for her. And then for the MRI, they're holding her down in the bed and giving her the anesthesia to do the MRI. Which she woke up from screaming because she was terrified because the last thing she probably remembered was being held down in a hospital bed. So it was horrible. But the EEG went so well because of that. And she even got blood drawn and it went well because we talked about what was going to happen.
Right. And I do want to talk about blood draws a little bit because that was an issue for Lucas. And he's still like ear checks. We don't look in his ears, and no doctor looks in his ears because when he was 6 people held him down to look in his ears. And I was just like, forget it. And like I said, I could pair that up, but at this point he's an adult. Not many times do you look in adults' ears. And we decided, I talked to the pediatrician and I'm like, I don't think we should just look in his ears ever. And blood draws are important though. And so we did practice with that, got a tourniquet. We practiced, obviously we didn't puncture the skin or anything, but and the other thing, especially because Lucas doesn't have the language and understanding that Elena has, is we want to make sure we have a big reinforcer at the end of things. Like when Lucas is going to do something new, even if we're going to, he goes to a haircut, he's used to that, but he kind of minds the spray, it's too cold and stuff. So at one point we're like, let's try to wash his hair in the sink. That's a big change for him. So now, even though I don't have to offer a huge reinforcement for haircuts, when I'm adding something new, like hair wash into the sink or a blood draw, I am going to have what I call a promise reinforcer, a reinforcer at the end. And for Lucas, that's usually food. Going out to eat, a Pop-Tart, which I know there's people out there rolling their eyes because who would give a child a Pop-Tart? But he knows if he does something big and new, he gets a Pop-Tart. For instance, he had to have a COVID test. I actually tested him a couple times. And that's not good. Like, and how do you practice that? And we set the reinforcement as drive-through for McDonald's, which is like always open, when you would get a COVID test. So if I asked him today, and the COVID test was like more than a year ago, if I asked him today, when the doctor did the nose test, what did you get afterwards? He'd be like, McDonald's fries. Like, he remembers that. Like, so he's like not understanding all the language about what's going to happen. So for kids with less language, you're going to have to use pictures. You're going to have to go on YouTube. I mean, you can go on YouTube and find anything. Getting your hair washed in the sink at the hairdresser. You can get videos of that. This is how it's going to look. This is what you're going to do. You're going to lean back. We're going to count. We use counting a lot. We use singing songs a lot during blood draws or that sort of thing. And then we are reminding him of the promise reinforcer before it starts, when it's ending. So those are just some of the techniques. I mean, it's really very similar, no matter if you have a typically developing child, a child with a lot of language, or a child with minimal language or even no language. It doesn't matter. You still should not expect crying, should not expect to hold kids down, because if you have to hold kids down, they get bigger and bigger, and it becomes a very dangerous procedure that, you can't do.
Exactly. Elena is projected to be about 5'11". Possibly
Wow.
6 feet. Yeah, my husband is 6'3". I am 5'3". So,
oh wow.
To give everyone a little glimpse into all of our size differences in our family, if I have a daughter, if I had held her down all of these years, I would not be able to continue to do so when Elena grows up, as she's 17 years old. If I would have just carried her kicking and screaming through the parking lot every single day of her life, she would never have learned to walk with me. I would never have, and then I would have this issue when she's 16, 17, 18 years old of, a person who is significantly larger than me running in the street. And I know a lot of you have sons, and, they're going to grow up and be big. Lucas is a grown man. And it's just so important that you take desensitization seriously.
Right. And it's never too early to start. And it's never too late to start. And just because they're a baby or an infant or a toddler and you can carry them or you can hold them down, you should not. You should really work on pairing and repairing and trying to have a calm situation. And if that means, visiting the doctor, I mean, initially looking in ears and stuff, it shouldn't be such a big issue. But I mean, I'm also a nurse, and I know, and my husband, is an emergency medicine physician. And in an emergency, you do have to hold him down. If Elena's flopping at the Walmart parking lot and you can pick her up, get out of there, get to safety. If Lucas doesn't flop, but if he all of a sudden had a problem, even though I would be reinforcing it with a Pop-Tart bribe to get him out, like, I got to get him out. I got to get us both to safety. And then we have to be the Monday morning quarterback. So if you're like, this is too much, my child screams for everything. Okay, deep breaths. You're not going to be able to solve everything, especially if your child is very large. But no matter what the age of your child or clients or ability level, there are things you can do. You can read chapter 13 of Turn Autism Around. You can listen to last week's podcast all about desensitization. You can watch some of the videos underneath marybarbera.com/197. I'm going to post the dental visit. We're going to post a screenshot of Michelle's most recent trip to the dentist. There are things you can do, and especially if your child's larger, you're probably going to need to work also with a behavior analyst, with medical people who embrace the slow, easy desensitization processes. It really doesn't have a lot to do with age or ability. It really is the same proven processes, but it does take time and it does take analysis if you push too far, and you may have to back it up a little bit. So anything else? I think it's a great, this was a great episode. It kind of highlights some of the really actionable things that, and you see it all the time too, Michelle. You're in our community. You see people struggling with this every day.
Absolutely. And I feel, since I've been in the Turn Autism Around community, I feel like a desensitization queen, because Elena has had to go through every single possible desens program made by me mostly, and then a little bit with her ABA clinic, but she no longer goes to ABA, and I just take care of it all on my own because of the Turn Autism Around approach.
Cool. And I know she just started preschool this year for the year, and
she started 4-year-old preschool.
4-year-old preschool, typical preschool, no support.
Yep. Typical preschool, no support. This is her second year of typical schooling. Last year, she did 3-year-old nursery school, which is another pre-K program, but for 3-year-olds. And so she did that, and no support there. She just did her first day of 4-year-old preschool. She loved it. She told me all about her day, and I just cried because 2.5 years ago, I wasn't sure she would be able to go to school at all, even with support, with her self-injurious behavior. Before I joined this program, I really wasn't sure that anything was going to be possible for her in the realm of the normal world. Yeah. So grateful to this community. So happy that I can give back a little bit and work for Turn Autism Around as well.
Yeah, well, we are extremely happy to have you and on our team supporting other parents. And it's really great to see not only improvements in language, but improvements in self-care and problem behaviors. You, Michelle, sharing your story, being really vocal about the progress, being vocal about the diagnosis. And, a lot of parents in your shoes would be like riding off into the sunset. She's really functioning really at more of a typical level than a child with autism at this point. And I appreciate you sharing your success and sharing the struggles that you had to get here, because it definitely does help others. So thank you so much. And look forward to seeing you again soon. I don't think this will be your last time on the podcast, and keep being that desensitization queen. I love that.
Thank you so much for having me here today.